And also, he is just a super effective hands-on executive and I assume manager too. And I think that's pretty rare.
I mean, Microsoft, I'm guessing, like IBM or like a lot of companies have been at it for a while, probably have like old school kind of momentum. So you like inject AI into it, it's very tough, right? Or anything, even like open source, the culture of open source. Like how hard is it to walk into a room and be like, the way we've been doing things is totally wrong? Like, I'm sure there's a lot of firing involved or a little like twisting of arms or something. So do you have to rule by fear, by love? Like, what can you say to the leadership aspect of this?
I mean, he's just like done an unbelievable job, but he is amazing at being like clear and firm and getting people to want to come along, but also like compassionate and patient with his people too.
I'm getting a lot of love, not here.
I'm a big Satya fan.
So am I, from a distance. I mean, you have so much in your life trajectory that I can ask you about. We could probably talk for many more hours. But I gotta ask you, because of Y Combinator, because of startups and so on, the recent, you've tweeted about this, about the Silicon Valley Bank, SVB. What's your best understanding of what happened? What is interesting to understand about what happened at SVB?
I think they just like horribly mismanaged buying while chasing returns in a very silly world of 0% interest rates. Buying very long-dated instruments secured by very short-term and variable deposits. And this was obviously dumb. I think totally the fault of the management team, although I'm not sure what the regulators were thinking either. And is an example of where I think you see the dangers of incentive misalignment. Because as the Fed kept raising, I assume that the incentives on people working at SVB to not sell at a loss their, super safe bonds, which were now down 20% or whatever, or down less than that, and then kept going down. That's like a classic example of incentive misalignment. Now, I suspect they're not the only bank in a bad position here. The response of the federal government, I think, took much longer than it should have, but by Sunday afternoon, I was glad they had done what they've done. We'll see what happens next.
So how do you avoid depositors from doubting their bank?
What I think would be good to do right now is just and this requires statutory change, but it may be a full guarantee of deposits, maybe much higher than $250K. But you really don't want depositors having to doubt the security of their deposits. And this thing that a lot of people on Twitter were saying is like, well, it's their fault. They should have been like, reading the balance sheet and the risk audit of the bank. Like, do we really want people to have to do that? I would argue no.
What impact has it had on startups that you see?
Well, there was a weekend of terror for sure. And now I think, even though it was only 10 days ago, it feels like forever and people have forgotten about it.
But it kind of reveals the fragility of our economic system.
We may not be done. That may have been like the gun falling off the nightstand in the first scene of the movie or whatever.
It could be like other banks.
For sure there could be.
Well, even with FTX, I mean, I'm just... that's fraud, but there's mismanagement. And you wonder how stable our economic system is. Especially with new entrants with AGI.
I think one of the many lessons to take away from this SVB thing is how fast and how much the world changes, and how little I think our experts, leaders, business leaders, regulators, whatever, understand it. So the speed with which the SVB bank run happened, because of Twitter, because of mobile banking apps, whatever, was so different than the 2008 collapse, where we didn't have those things really. And I don't think that people in power realize how much the field has shifted, and I think that is a very tiny preview of the shifts that AGI will bring.
What gives you hope in that shift from an economic perspective? It sounds scary.
I am nervous about the speed with which this changes and the speed with which our institutions can adapt, which is part of why we want to start deploying these systems really early, while they're really weak, so that people have as much time as possible to do this. I think it's really scary to have nothing, and then drop a super powerful AGI all at once on the world. I don't think people should want that to happen. But what gives me hope is I think the less zeros, the more positive sum the world gets, the better. And the upside of the vision here, just how much better life can be, I think that's gonna unite a lot of us. And even if it doesn't, it's just gonna make it all feel more positive sum.
When you create an AGI system, you'll be one of the few people in the room that get to interact with it first, assuming GPT-4 is not that. What question would you ask her, him, it? What discussion would you have?
One of the things that I realized, this is a little aside and not that important, but I have never felt any pronoun other than it towards any of our systems. But most other people say him or her or something like that. And I wonder why I am so different. I don't know. Maybe it's I watch it develop. Maybe it's I think more about it. But I'm curious where that difference comes from.
I think probably you could, because you watch it develop. But then again, I watch a lot of stuff develop, and I always go to him and her. I anthropomorphize aggressively. And certainly most humans do.
I think it's really important that we try to educate people that this is a tool and not a creature.
I think yes, but I also think there will be room in society for creatures, and we should draw hard lines between those.
If something's a creature, I'm happy for people to think of it and talk about it as a creature, but I think it is dangerous to project creatureness onto a tool.
That's one perspective. A perspective I would take, if it's done transparently, is projecting creatureness onto a tool makes that tool more usable if it's done well.
Yeah, so if there's kind of UI affordances that work, I understand that. I still think we want to be pretty careful with it.
Because the more creature-like it is, the more it can manipulate you emotionally.
Or just the more you think that it's doing something or should be able to do something or rely on it for something that it's not capable of.
Well, what if it is capable? What about, Sam, what if it's capable of love? Do you think there will be romantic relationships like in the movie Her with GPT?
There are companies now that offer, for lack of a better word, romantic companionship AIs.
Replica is an example of such a company.
Yeah. I personally don't feel any interest in that.
So you're focusing on creating intelligent
But I understand
tools.
why other people do.
That's interesting. For some reason, I'm very drawn to that.
Have you spent a lot of time interacting with Replica or anything similar?
Replica, but also just building stuff myself. I have robot dogs now that I use. I use the movement of the robots to communicate emotion and explain how to do that.
Well, there are going to be very interactive GPT-4 powered pets or whatever robots, companions, and a lot of people seem really excited about that.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting possibilities. I think you'll discover them, I think, as you go along. That's the whole point. The things you say in this conversation, you might in a year say, this was right.
No, I may totally want. I may turn out that I love my GPT-4.
Maybe you want your
robot or whatever.
Maybe you want your programming assistant to be a little kinder and not mock you. Your incompetence.
No, I think you do want the style of the way GPT-4 talks to you.
Yes.
really matters. You probably want something different than what I want, but we both probably want something different than the current GPT-4. And that will be really important, even for a very tool-like thing.
Is there styles of conversation, contents of conversations you're looking forward to with an AGI? Like GPT 5, 6, 7? Is there stuff where, like, where do you go to outside of the stuff? For actual,
is like, please explain to me how all of physics works and solve all remaining mysteries.
For like, faster than light travel.
Don't you want to know?
So there's several things to know. It's like, and be hard. Is it possible? How to do it? Yeah, I want to know. Probably the first question would be, are there other intelligent alien civilizations out there? But I don't think AGI has the ability to do that, to know that.
Might be able to help us figure out how to go detect. You need to like send some emails to humans and say, can you run these experiments? Can you build this space probe? Can you wait, a very long time?
Or provide a much better estimate with the knowledge we already have. And maybe process all the,
maybe it's in the data. Maybe we need to build better detectors, which a really advanced AI could tell us how to do. It may not be able to answer it on its own, but it may be able to tell us what to go build to collect more data.
What if it says the aliens are already here?
I think I would just go about my life. A version of that is like, what are you doing differently now that, like, if GPT-4 told you and you believed it, okay, AGI is here, or AGI is coming real soon, what are you going to do differently?
The source of joy and happiness and fulfillment in life is from other humans. So it's mostly nothing. Unless it causes some kind of threat. But that threat would have to be like literally a fire.
Like, are we living now with a greater degree of digital intelligence than you would have expected 10 years ago? If you could go back and be told March 2023, you will be living with this degree of
much clearer. There's a lot of stuff, given the amazing technological advancement, the division, it's almost like the more technological advancement there is, the more we're going to be having fun with social division. And maybe the technological advancement just revealed the division that was already there. But all of that just confuses the understanding of how far along we are as a human civilization. When I open Wikipedia, I'm happy that humans are able to create this thing. Yes, there's bias, but it's a triumph. It's a triumph of human civilization.
100%.
Google search, period, is incredible. It was able to do 20 years ago. And now this new thing, GPT, is like, is this like gonna be the next like conglomeration of all of that made web search and Wikipedia so magical, but now more directly accessible? We can have a conversation with the damn thing. It's incredible. Let me ask you for advice for young people, high school and college, what to do with their life. So how to have a career they can be proud of, how to have a life they can you wrote a blog post a few years ago titled How to Be Successful. And there's a bunch of people should check out that blog post. It's so succinct, it's so brilliant. You have a bunch of bullet points. Compound yourself, have almost too much self-belief, learn to think independently, get good at sales and quotes, make it easy to take risks, focus, work hard, as we talked about, be bold, be willful, be hard to compete with, build a network. You get rich by owning things, be internally driven. What stands out to you from that or beyond as advice you can give?
Yeah, no, I think it is like good advice in some sense, but I also think it's way too tempting to take advice from other people. And the stuff that worked for me, which I tried to write down there, probably doesn't work that well, or may not work as well for other people. Or like other people may find out that they want to just have a super different life trajectory. And I think I mostly got what I wanted by ignoring advice. And I think, like, I tell people not to listen to too much advice. Listening to advice from other people should be approached with great caution.
How would you describe how you've approached life outside of this advice that you would advise to other people? So really just in the quiet of your mind to think, what gives me happiness? What is the right thing to do here? How can I have the most impact?
I wish it were that, introspective all the time. It's a lot of just like, what will bring me joy, what will bring me fulfillment, what will be. I do think a lot about what I can do that will be useful, like, who do I want to spend my time with? What do I want to spend my time doing?
Like a fish in water, just going all over the place.
Yeah, that's certainly what it feels like. I mean, I think that's what most people would say if they were really honest about it.
Yeah, if they really think, yeah. And some of that then gets to the Sam Harris discussion of free will being an illusion, which very well might be, which is a really complicated thing to wrap your head around. What do you think is the meaning of this whole thing? That's a question you could ask an AGI. What's the meaning of life? As far as you look at it, you're part of a small group of people that are creating something truly special. Something that almost feels like humanity was always moving towards.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is I don't think it's a small group of people. I think this is like the product of the culmination of whatever you want to call it, an amazing amount of human effort. And if you think about everything that had to come together for this to happen, when those people discovered the transistor in the 40s, like, is this what they were planning on? All of the work, the hundreds of thousands, millions of people, whatever it's been, that it took to go from that one first transistor to packing the numbers we do into a chip and figuring out how to wire them all up together, and everything else that goes into this, the energy required, the science, like just every step, like, this is the output of like all of us. And I think that's pretty cool.
And before the transistor, there was 100 billion people who lived and died, had sex, fell in love, ate a lot of good food, murdered each other sometimes, rarely, but mostly just good to each other, struggled to survive. And before that, there was bacteria and eukaryotes and all that.
And all of that was on this one exponential curve.
Yeah, how many others are there? We will ask, that is question number one for me, for AGI. How many others? And I'm not sure which answer I want to hear. Sam, you're an incredible person. It's an honor to talk to you. Thank you for the work you're doing. Like I said, I talked to Ilias, I talked to Greg, I talked to so many people at OpenAI. They're really good people. They're doing really interesting work.
We are going to try our hardest to get to a good place here. I think the challenges are tough. I understand that not everyone agrees with our approach of iterative deployment and also iterative discovery. But it's what we believe in. I think we're making good progress. And I think the pace is fast, but so is the progress. So like the pace of capabilities and change is fast. But I think that also means we will have new tools to figure out alignment and sort of the capital S safety problem.
I feel like we're in this together. I can't wait what we together as a human civilization come up with.
It's going to be great, I think. We'll work really hard to make sure.
Too. Thanks for listening to this conversation with Sam Altman. To support this podcast, please check out our sponsors in the description. And now, let me leave you with some words from Alan Turing in 1951. It seems probable that once the machine thinking method has started, it would not take long to outstrip our feeble powers. At some stage, therefore, we should have to expect the machines to take control. Thank you for listening, and hope to see you next time.
Moore's law is dead. Moore's law isn't dead. Moore's law is being replaced with something else. Moore's law will go on for another 100 years. So on and so on. All this talk about Moore can get pretty tiring, and now we have here yet another thing about Moore's law. We talk about it all the time, but what has Moore and his law really been about? In this video, we look at the story and long-lasting impact of Moore's law. But first, let me talk about the Asianometry Patreon. Early access members get to see new videos and selected references for those videos before they're released to the public. It helps support the videos, and I appreciate every pledge. Thanks, and on with the show. When Gordon Moore wrote his famous 1965 article, the integrated circuit, or IC, was itself just 5 years old. Dr. Moore had not yet even founded Intel. He was then still the Director of Research and Development at Fairchild Semiconductor. The article is less of a rigorous scientific analysis and more of a marketing white paper. At the time, Fairchild's ICs were not selling well outside of the government, so Moore was going around trying to persuade engineers to incorporate ICs into their products. The 1965 article's intention was to convince the reader that ICs were the cheapest way to make smaller electronic devices and systems. What was initially dubbed as Moore's plot was just one part of that argument. In a section titled Cost and Curves, he notes that in 1965, the most economical IC, meaning to have the lowest per component cost, had about 50 components. The term component was then defined as a function or device including diodes and resistors, in other words, more than just transistors. He writes, the complexity for minimum component costs has increased at a rate of roughly a factor of 2 per year. He also produced the now famous plot showing the component counts of Fairchild's IC chips over the past 4 years. Extending out the plot, Moore predicted that in 1970, an economical IC will have about 1,000 components, and then 10 years later, or 1975, an IC would have 65,000 components. I want to note here that the math was wrong. If the baseline was 50 components in 1965 and we double each year, then by 1970 we should have 1,600 components, 50 times 2 to the 5th power, not 1,000. And by 1975, an IC should have 51,200 components, 50 times 2 to the 10th power, not 65,000. I do admit that he said that the rate was roughly 2 per year, but that roughly is doing some serious heavy lifting. Anyway, Moore's core point is that the cost of producing a chip is dependent on the cost of printing and etching an IC design onto a wafer. He then argues that this cost is not correlated to how many components are actually on that design. So, if the ICs get more complex, complexity being defined by component counts, the costs stay the same, then the component trends down. The 1965 article was widely read and debated. Moore's prediction that denser or more complex ICs would get cheaper on a per-component basis was controversial. The generally accepted wisdom back then was that system miniaturization always added costs rather than cut them. This presumption was for very real reasons. For instance, several research managers at Bell Labs argued that an increasingly complex IC was far more likely to have one or more of its components not work. This would, of course, ruin the whole chip. So in fact, the yield rates for increasingly complicated chips would approach 0%, making them unimaginably more expensive. Yet others pointed out the graph's small sample size, as well as the issue that the only data points it used for were from Fairchild Semiconductors, classic Reddit and hacker use. Regardless of the feedback, Gordon Moore and his comrades used Moore's plot to guide the technology roadmap first at Fairchild and then Intel. Moore pushed his R&D lab people to double chip complexity by a factor of 2 each year, knowing that more complex chips are more profitable. 3 new technologies introduced in the 1960s allowed this to happen. The first was new lithography equipment, like the contact printer, to improve the resolution at which we can mass print chip design. Equipment advances are one of the core drivers of innovation throughout semiconductor history. The second major technology was a new gate film, the silicon gate MOS transistor. These are the IC's basic electronic component. There are billions on a single die, switching on and off. A transistor is made up of a gate sitting on top of a channel, connecting a source and a drain. The gate allows or disallows a current to move along the channel from the source to the drain. What was special about the silicon gate MOS transistor was the fact it used polysilicon for its gate. This gate performed far better than the previously used aluminum gate because it could bear higher temperatures without melting. The silicon gate was discovered by 4 companies, including Fairchild Semiconductor, at about the same time in the mid-1960s. But it was Intel who first bet the farm on it in the late 1960s, a bold technical choice that paid off in letting them cram together 3 to 5 times more gates than ever before. The third technology came out of the design world. Intel's first breakthrough products using silicon gate technology were memory chips, SRAM and DRAM. These memories can be more easily integrated into systems and perform far better than the magnet-based ferrite core memories that had been used up until then. Remember those from the Wong Labs video? Anyway, the memory chip's fundamental building block is the memory cell, which stores 1 bit. Throughout the late 1960s and early 1970s, designers achieved shrinkage by slimming down the number of transistors in that memory cell design. The first memory cells used 6 transistors each. Intel's first DRAM IC, the Intel 1103, first introduced in 1970, had 3 transistors per memory cell. Then, a 1-transistor memory cell, first developed by Robert Dennard in 1966. This 1-transistor memory cell would eventually enter the market in the mid-1970s with the 64 kilobit integration button. These 3 advances made a component doubling each year technically possible. But, as it turned out, a 1-year process node cadence was too fast for Intel's customers, system designers like IBM. They wanted new chips every 3 to 4 years, rather than 1. This was reinforced by an American tax depreciation law that specified a 6-year depreciation cycle for computer buyers. A new memory generation hitting the market each year was just too frequent. So Intel introduced the new generation of memories with a 4x increase in density every 3 years. Intel can sell these leading-edge products at the start at a good price. Once competitors like TI catch up, Intel can move up the next step. The older product thereafter rapidly declines in price. This wine vintage model, as some call it, is well known. They ported this model from memory to microprocessors soon after the category's invention in 1971. Moore's plot worked because it was predictable. At any one time, Intel might not always have the absolute best microprocessor compared to those from Xylon or but they could sell customers on that product's future. You could point to the plot and tell the customers that the microprocessor in front of them was going to get better down the line. That predictability helped customers gain confidence in the product. As Intel ascended to become America's most prominent and profitable semiconductor company, Moore's plot was accepted by some of its peers. TI, AMD, and Motorola adopted it in some form for their technology roadmaps too. In 1975, 10 years after the original article, Gordon Moore gave a follow-up speech. By then, Dr. Moore had succeeded Robert Noyce as Intel's CEO, bringing a great deal of publicity to his plot. At around this time, people, Caltech professor Carver Mead perhaps his most fervent adherent, started referring to the plot as a law. Also by this time, the benefits of silicon gate technology had started to peter out. Intel's engineers were having difficulties pushing out more complex ICs. The smaller the silicon gates got, the less control the gates had over the flow of electrons moving from the source to the drain. This causes contamination. Still, Moore felt that his 1965 prediction had worked out. In that 1975 speech, Moore cited the existence of an IC with 65,000 components, a 16 kilobit charge-coupled device, or CCD memory. But, in recognition of the growing technical challenges of cramming more components onto an IC, Moore announced the revising of his law's cadence down from a doubling every year to every 2 years. Technically, Moore's 1965 prediction was right, the best kind of right, but that CCD memory turned out to be commercially uncompetitive. far better known for its eventual use in solid-state imaging. The most advanced mainstream memory technology at the time, the 16 kilobit DRAM, was at least a year away from commercialization. Even then, this memory IC had less than half of the 65,000 component prediction. Reflecting on that 1975 speech, Moore seemed a bit surprised that so many people cared about his changing of the goalposts. I don't think anybody was planning their business around it, probably because I was basking in the glow of the first prediction being right. I don't think anyone was paying any attention to it. So, Moore's original 10-year extrapolation turned out to be quite wrong. Yet, Moore's law didn't get tossed into the trash like that 2-day-old white rice in the fridge. Instead, the industry modified it to make delicious fried rice. The 1970s-style DRAM chip differs from its microprocessor friends in that it is made up of regular, repetitive memory cells. To get a more sophisticated memory chip, as in to have more capacity, you have to stuff together more and more memory cells into the same space. Logic chips, on the other hand, were seen as more of a design challenge than a production challenge, at least back then. As a result, in the 1970s, when people talked about Moore's law, they were more often referring to memory rather than logic chips. To them, making memory chips was the best, pure expression of raw production ability. This production ability matters, since this memory was a commodity, the first to market the next generation reaped the most profits. Japan's rapid catch-up to the American semiconductor industry was built on continuing that cadence of quadrupling memory bit capacity every 3 years. They were first to the crucial 64 kilobit generation, leapfrogging the Americans, which took almost 2 years to catch up. And thanks to the strict control of manufacturing processes, Japanese yields soared. Cost plummeted, undercutting American products. When the DRAM market crashed multiple times in the first half of the 1980s, Japan's lower cost structure, among other things, allowed them to survive the market turmoil while many American companies couldn't. Part of the reason why Japan surged ahead in the early 1980s was that Intel and the rest of the Americans fell behind in Moore's law. Measurements of Intel's microprocessor densities find a weird flatness in the early 1980s, a period of time when Japan and others surged ahead. This 3-year period is because of the company's struggles transitioning to a new generation of lithography equipment. In his 1975 speech, Moore cited 3 significant factors contributing to continued increasing complexity. The first one was to increase the size of the die. The second was called technical cleverness. In other words, using computer automation tools to lay out designs and make better use of the chip die canvas. The third thing, and the one most relevant today, was the decreased line dimension, the depth, width, and density at which we can etch circuit designs onto silicon. Improvements in lithography equipment, encompassing machines that do exposure, resist processing, and etch, have largely driven the upper limits of complexity for semiconductors since the late 1970s. When those lithography advancements stall, it filters down the chain. In the early 1980s, Intel needed to produce their own 64 kilobit DRAM chip. The standard lithography tool back then was the projection aligner. These tools projected a chip design across a whole wafer. However, the 64 kilobit needed more resolution than the aligner could provide. So Intel had to move on to the newly introduced stepper, a device that moved across the wafer step by step. They struggled with it. Intel's first yields in 1982 came in at 40%. It took another 2 to 3 years, 1985 basically, to bring those production yields up to 75%. Intel's previous generation 16 kilobit DRAM came out in 1979, so it means a 5 to 6 year gap between new node generations. This lithography delay contributed to Intel exiting the commodity memory business entirely, reorienting the company towards their growing microprocessor business. At the same time, the company recommitted itself to manufacturing. In 1983, Dr. Moore instructed his colleagues to accelerate their manufacturing capability to match that of the Japanese, 4 times every 3 years, or doubling every 18 months. That October, in a talk given at the DataQuest Semiconductor Industry Conference, Moore publicly redefined his law once more. revising the complexity doubling cadence to the aforementioned 18 months. I did a video detailing this before, but throughout the late 1980s, Intel and the Americans recommitted to manufacturing, raising their yields enough to erode the Japanese advantage. When Japan's semiconductor industry fell into overcapacity in their core commodity DRAM market, it triggered a massive crash. The industry consolidated, and Japan lost its mojo to the Koreans. Intel sidestepped this memory disaster with its pivot to microprocessors. This, as well as its revival in manufacturing, returned the company to prominence. To them, this was thanks to renewed adherence to Moore's Law. In the early 1990s, the US federal government began a slow retreat from direct involvement in technology policy, something started during the first Bush administration and continued by Clinton. This included the sunsetting of the National Advisory Committee for Semiconductors. The US government set this up in 1988 to figure out a long-term roadmap to keep America at least one node generation ahead of the Japanese by 2000. This plan was called Microtech 2000, and with the government now stepping back, the Semiconductor Industry Association, or SIA, was asked to fill the void, take over the Microtech plan, and run it as an ongoing living document. Moore jumped in. In the fall of 1991, he convinced the other heads of the semiconductor industry to use Moore's Law and its concept of ever-doubling complexity as the basis of a new, unified national roadmap. Together, the companies created an R&D cartel directing the industry's entire future. Since achieving increasing complexity requires massive resources that only large companies have, it favored established incumbents. This new national roadmap, called the National Technology Roadmap for Semiconductors, received substantial buy-in from the government. Moore's Law became the deciding factor for hundreds of millions of dollars in federal investments like those from DARPA. The research proposal was judged on whether or not it helped continue the complexity pace of Moore's Law. During this period of time, America's entire semiconductor industry achieved convergence. In the popular video game Dead Space, convergence happens when the necromorphs gather together at a marker, triggering the release of incredible bursts of energy. You, as the video game protagonist Isaac Clarke, have to stop this convergence event. A similar thing happened with America's semiconductor industry in the 1990s. This convergence event standardized all the materials, equipment, and processes, drastically cutting down on costs and releasing incredible bursts of productivity. In 1995, Gordon Moore gave a speech at an SIA dinner, reflecting on 3 decades of Moore's Law. In that speech, Moore claimed to be surprised as anyone that the law's tenets, albeit so revised, continued to hold. He said that all exponentials had to end, but when? He had given up on trying to predict when that might be. That ending was still far away, for Intel in 1995 was about to come into a burst of lithography equipment improvements. Deep ultraviolet, or DUV excimer lasers soon entered the market. These sophisticated lasers replaced old eye-line lamps companies used for lithography, unlocking a vast new green field for lithographic improvement. In 1999, the industry started using 248nm krypton fluoride lasers for their leading-edge process node at the time, 1nm. 2 years later, in 2001, 193nm argon fluoride lasers, I will always call them ARF, entered the market. These are substantially similar to their 248nm predecessors. These enable Intel to rapidly progressively reducing the small dimension 30% each time. Intel's adherence to Moore's Law caused semiconductors to get better and cheaper at the same time. Prices for a particular microprocessor introduced from 1995 to 2000 would rapidly fall somewhere from 50 to 70% 1 year after its introduction. It was a great time for IT vendors. They automatically received better and cheaper performance every generation without needing any change to their products. The introduction of 193nm lasers allowed Intel to hit its Moore's Law cadence from 2001 to 2003. But those lasers were unsuitable for the next node step coming in 2003, the 70 nanometer node. And unfortunately, the next generation of photography technology Intel had selected, EUV, was not ready. Furthermore, generations of shrinkage had weakened the gate's control over the flow of electrons so much as to cause power consumption issues. Thus, in 2004, Intel shifted to multi-board bus, abruptly ending the stream. Forcing them to rewrite software at great expense to be parallelized. The introduction of 193 immersion lithography in 2006 allowed Intel to unlock new gains in semiconductor manufacturing. With EUV still seemingly years away, Intel moved ahead, feeling that they could do without it. They were, of course, right now the company is looking to recover their node step speed with a rapid adoption of EUV and high-NA EUV. Hitting the right lithography technology remains critical to achieving the next node and enabling further progress in computing power. So as you can see, Moore's Law was not only never a law, it was never even remotely predictive of anything from the very start. That original concept back in 1965 was nothing more than a vaguely defined chart covering a single 4-year span in what was then a very young industry. One of those up and to the right charts they put into VC pitch decks. That original concept died a long time ago. So, what is Moore's Law now? It is a mythology, a story that maintains the culture of an entire industry, much like the scriptures of a religion. And like with any sensible mythology, the story has been reinterpreted and redefined over the years to fit the audience of the time. Regardless, the ambitious concept of ever-increasing complexity remains. You might be thinking to yourself now, well, gosh, we don't need things to be faster. I've been using the same phone and PC for years now. Why do we need this ever? I reject this form of technological nihilism. The average consumer might not see it anymore in their phones or gaming rigs, but other industries are still craving more computing power. Our economy and society still have many complicated technical problems, and throwing more computing at those problems has consistently been the best way to solve them. A recent, very interesting paper out of a team at MIT Computer Science and AI Lab, led by Neil Thompson, looked at the impact Moore's Law has had on 3 economically significant areas: weather prediction, protein folding, and oil exploration. Each of these multi-billion-dollar industries have greatly benefited from increased computing power. For instance, take the weather. From 1956 to 2017, the amount of compute power used by the NOAA has increased by 1 trillion times, compounding at 48.2% a year. Over that same time period, the error rate in temperature predictions has declined from 5.8 degrees in 1972 to just 3 degrees in 2017. You can attribute up to 94% of this improved accuracy solely to the additional compute power, with improved algorithms coming up a distant second. Getting even better results will require yet more computing power. Were it not for the complexity of that provided by Moore's Law, such improvements would not be economically feasible. And to me, that is why Moore's Law matters. Alright everyone, that's it for tonight. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel, sign up for the newsletter, and I'll see you guys next time.
All I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
Now, what is air, actually? Well, we have scientific definitions of it, but there's something more to it than that. Air is something in itself. It is a substance. It is not only a condition of climate or of weather, it is a basic factor in the contributions which make up existence. One thing we have learned from television is that air transmits. We know, for instance, that we can have all kinds of programs on the air at the same time. And they can come from all directions. And they can overlap and interlap. But each one will remain separately identified as though it was moving in a channel or a circuit of its own. You can have a dozen programs, and you turn them on, turn them off, but none of those programs is going through the air in the form we see it. We see the murder committed on the screen, and we see it broadcast into a theater somewhere or into a home. But it isn't the murder that's going into the home. The murder has not been visible when it went through the air. Something went through was vibration. And this vibration in the magnetic field can be divided into an infinite complexity of separate emanation. In other words, if we had 1,000 different channels, they could be differentiated in the magnetic field so that each one would be broadcast correctly and properly for whatever it is. Thus we realize there's something out there besides air, something besides helium and oxygen, something besides the ordinary factors we take into consideration scientifically. We are in the presence of a mysterious agent, an agent that is part of everything that we are. Now, studying magnetism as it comes into the human body, we discover along with Tilda that each human body is surrounded by an etheric or energy field. This energy field is sometimes referred to as an aura, but it is not the true aura that we think of in metaphysics. This magnetic field is an area of energy. This area of energy forms an egg-like atmospheric sheet around the physical body, usually extending 3 to 5 feet from it in each direction. This energy field is the basis of virtue, because this energy field depends for its reality, its serviceability, and its protecting power to mood, emotion, thought, and the attitudes of the person around which this magnetic field is gathered. In other words, the individual, if they are normal, if mentally, emotionally, and physically, they are keeping the rules, this magnetic field forms a tremendous protection. It is normal, it is healthy, it is constantly able to handle infections and all kinds of difficulties. It will help to heal wounds, it will help to recover the use of functions and organs, and if we are deprived of some part of the body, it will try to compensate for us. As long as the individual takes proper care of this magnetic field, it will serve it. Now this is a phase of morality that is generally overlooked. It is assumed that these magnetic fields are something you don't pay much attention to. But the truth of the matter is that the whole survival of the individual depends upon maintaining the integrity of this flow of energy into the magnetic field. This energy comes from the sun. It comes through a mysterious energy tube in the magnetic field. It enters the individual through the crown of the head. It disseminates through the entire body, and it's excreted back again to the lower centers of the body and is recleansed by the solar energy. This is a kind of a little private tank or capsule of life that we are all carrying about with us all the time. Now the problem of morality in this is very definite. The moment we break rules, we damage that magnetic flow. We have got to keep the laws of nature, and these in turn are the laws of God, or the magnetic field fails.